So now I want to transition over to our first panel. And the panel is going to be focused on issues in advances in real estate technology and data. And we have a very exciting lineup. In the interest of time, I've asked each of our panelists to just say a few words, introducing themselves when it's their turn to speak. And again, you can submit questions through the chat box, and I hope that we'll have some time at the end to take those questions. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn the platform over to Joe McBride. He's the head of commercial real estate finance at TREP.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So quick apologies because my screens are in front of me, but my webcam is here. So if it looks like I'm not looking at you, I'm not, but I apologize for that. Really great to hear Wayne speak. It was a great overview. BlackRock and Wayne and TREP go back a long way. So seeing all those CMBS and CMBX and conduit spreads and all those types of things was, felt like home. I'll just mention one or two things before I go on. Wayne talked about distress in the market and retail and lodging. A couple of interesting data points that TREP has been looking at lately. One is that in the CMBS universe, 20% of lodging loans in the CMBS universe, meaning hotel loans, did not make their April mortgage payment. That's up from about 1.5 or 2% on average going back in time. Retail went up to over 10% of retail loans did not make their payment in April. And office and multifamily and industrial all had small increases. So it does not necessarily mean delinquency or default yet, but it is a good kind of canary in the coal mine for the level magnitude of distress that we may see over the next several months. Anyway, if you want to go on to the next slide, I'm supposed to talk very quickly for the next 10 minutes or so about the commercial real estate, or I guess real estate tech universe. And I figured, from my standpoint, I work at a company called TREP. We are a financial CMBS, commercial real estate, CLO, data, models, and analytics company. Pretty much anyone who invests in CMBS or commercial real estate debt is a client of ours in some way or another. Actually, BlackRock owned a big chunk of TREP for the early 2000s, so they were a big part of our growth when I wasn't at TREP. I was just a child at that time, but all good stories from the old days. So just a quick slide about what we do. We provide cash flow models and loan level data and deal and bond level data to the CMBS industry to do their analysis, to value commercial real estate and to value commercial CMBS bonds. We've also branched out into banking and other structured finance worlds. We have loss models for commercial real estate. We have collateralized loan obligation platforms. So we've our core is CMBS and commercial real estate, but we've been expanding into other areas. And I think, I and other people at TREP are in a very good position to talk about the commercial real estate tech landscape, because we were a fintech commercial real estate startup, but that was like 40 years ago, right? And we have been one of the companies that have, successfully transitioned from that startup phase into a strong, mature, operating, profitable business. And as we'll talk about in a minute, making money is actually important now. Generating revenues and generating profits is something that's required in an environment like this, which is not the same as what it was even 3 months ago, where there were many, many, many firms and startups and sexy companies that could raise VC money and continue to burn cash because, there was expectations of exponential growth in the future. That's really not so much the case right now. You can move on to the next slide. So I'm keeping everything very simple, right? Because I have 10 minutes and we want to just really get a sense of how the world works here. And, again, TREP, we see new tech startups and we talk to them all the time because we have a very good distribution network, a very, loyal and large client base. So a lot of CRE startups want to come to us and ask for advice or potentially get onto our platforms to get access to our client base and that loyalty. So, what is the point of any of this? Well, if you boil it down to the true essence, it's you want to answer one or both of these two questions, right? What is the value of the asset that I care about, right? Whether that's a commercial real estate property, a lease, a loan, a distressed asset, whatever it may be. And then potentially on the other side of things, how can I do my job better, faster, cheaper, and more often, right? And the answers to those questions are data and software. So it would surprise you that most companies can't do both, right? There are data companies and there are software companies, and it's very rare that the twain shall meet. I would say that TREP is somewhere in the middle. We make a lot of money on our data, but we also have cash flow models and cash flow projection engines and things like that, which are very important to the market. You can see I put the kind of major categories or buckets on the slide here. If we think of everything as revolving around a property, which is one way to think of things, not the only way. When you think about that property, there is potentially debt, there are historical transactions, sales, leases, etc. There are the underlying tenants in that property. There's the financial performance of the property, so revenues, expenses, net operating income, net cash flow, debt service coverage ratio, etc. And then who's the owner is, right? Is it a large institutional sponsor or is it a mom and pop who have 5 or 6 multifamily units? And those are important pieces of information. So you can go on to the next slide. In the data space, there are a few things that can make you successful. One is it hard to recreate the data set that you're selling? If it is, then you have a differentiator, right? You have a moat, you might say, around you. The other is, can you discern actionable intelligence from the noise? So I've looked at data sets from all sorts of startups, mobile phone tracking, satellite pictures, all sorts of alternative data sets, and they're all very, very exciting and interesting. But if you can't take that data and turn it into a buy, sell, hold recommendation about a bond or a property, then it's really meaningless, right? So it's not only how much data you have, but can you actually draw insights from it? That's very, very important. And then can you sell it for more than it costs to collect it, right? That's a big one. The nice thing is if the answer is yes, you can collect it once and sell it many, many times. And here along the bottom and on the left side there, I've just put the very high level pieces of information and data that would be important in every single bucket of categories here, right? So property, demographic information, debt, all the pieces of information about the debt, right? Maturity, loan rate, size, debt service coverage ratio, et cetera, historical transactions, who the tenants are, what their credit scores are, what their long-term feasibility, viability is. These are all very, very important pieces of information when you're analyzing a commercial real estate property or a loan or a bond. You can keep going here. So I'm going very quickly because I only have a few minutes, but that's okay. Just a quick example of some of the data points that we talked about. I picked a large property in New York. It's actually around the corner from BlackRock's office before they moved to Hudson Yards. And you can see we have pieces of all those different buckets of information. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of software, we talked about data. In terms of software, in every one of these buckets and in every interaction between one of these buckets, there is work that needs to be done, right? So if you think about a mortgage broker, that guy needs to find a potential new lead. He needs to call the owner of the property and he needs to say, I can offer you better, newer, bigger financing, right? That's one very small workflow in the larger universe of things, right? I'm a property owner and I need to manage all of my rent rolls and all of my tenants and all the interaction between me and my tenants. That's another workflow. And I could probably name 1,000 more. but every one of these specific workflows has probably 10 or 15 or 20 software companies that have been built up around them, right? And how do we differentiate ourselves, and how do we make a software company that actually is successful? Well, you have to either have an entrenched user base. Think of Bloomberg, think of Facebook or Google or whoever. Like, if a new search engine came along, or if a new financial data provider came along, it's going to be very hard to take out that entrenched player, even if the entrenched player is not doing things as well as they could, right? So do you have that entrenched user base that you can leverage? If you're new, can you create that network effect by offering a better mousetrap, or offering some sort of functionality that didn't exist before, and offering some sort of communication mechanism between these different buckets, right? I think of a company called VTS Hightower, View the Space. They have come in and kind of totally changed how office leases are done. And while they've done that, they've had brokers and owners and tenants all come onto their platform and created a network. Then the bigger that network gets, the stronger it becomes, and it's kind of a virtuous circle of growth for them. They've been a very interesting and successful company over the last few years. And do you do one piece of the process very well, or are you a platform for the whole process? Right now, I think the software industry is very focused on modularized type software, meaning that I'm a company and I do one specific thing, and I can plug that one specific thing into a larger software system if I need to. The software kind of platform world is much different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. You can move on there. I'm going a couple minutes over here. So this is a slide that I stole from an investment bank that had a good marketplace overview. And I've just, in kind of hard to see here, but in green rectangles, I've kind of circled the players in this market that are very successful right now and are fairly entrenched. So you have Yardi on the property management side. You have CoStar, which is the 800-pound gorilla in the room in terms of commercial real estate data. They are everywhere. You have VTS, I mentioned them. Argus, I would say you probably, if you're in the real estate school, you probably have heard of Argus. And if you haven't, you should probably take a quick training on it. It's something good to know if you're going into commercial real estate. Moody's recently purchased Reis, which is a very big commercial real estate data company that has been around for a long time. And Moody's is really wrangling a lot of different real estate data providers. And I think they're trying to take on CoStar, which is a big hurdle. And then I happen to circle TREP on the bottom there. We are kind of the number one provider in the CMBS and CRE finance markets. And then the last slide, again, what can we do, or how do we get success in this world? Well, you need an actionable, unique, hard to recreate data set, or you can create a better mousetrap, right? Modernize a legacy inefficient workflow. In the real estate world, it's one of the last bastions of 1980s software and old school kind of relationship-based transactions. And I think that's going to be hard to change, but there's definitely a lot of room for change there. And then lastly, what a lot of the very, very successful companies are doing right now is they're doing both. They're creating a software that helps somebody do their job faster, better, quicker, more efficiently, for less cost, for less headcount. And in the process of them doing that job, they happen to be entering information into this software, which then that software company can aggregate, anonymize, and use to drive insights for those clients, and then potentially for kind of the rest of the universe. So, that's a very, very high level view of what's going on, but I hope it gave you a sense of kind of the bigger universe. And I'd just like to say thanks for having me. And I'd like to shout out Professor Spieler, Andrew Spieler, who's at Hofstra, who got me in here, and very happy that I could be of service.
Joe, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. And our next panelist in this session is Ethan Fox. who is a software engineer at Capsule. And I just want to remind the panelists to stick to their time as much as possible. Thanks.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes.
All right, great. Once the presentation gets up, I guess we can get started. But first, I guess I'd like to thank Dr. Nick Bach for inviting me to speak today, as well as the Breslin Center for putting this event together. And so the presentation that we have for you is blockchain and its applications extending to real estate. So a little bit about myself. As of last week, I'm a software engineer at Capsule, and we're a pharmacy delivery service in New York City, and we just opened up in Minneapolis as well. But for the last 2 years and change, I was a lead developer in the IBM Blockchain Innovation Unit. We were a consulting group within IBM that builds private blockchain solutions for enterprise clients. And so my experience in this process is from ideation to implementation. So for any given client or multiple clients called consortiums, I participated in discovery workshops to gather business requirements around solutions. And then I was also responsible for building the application layer that people use to interact with the blockchain at a high level. So first, I'm going to give a brief overview about what blockchain sets out to accomplish. And then I'm going to take a consultant's approach to building a blockchain solution as it pertains to real estate. So as I go through these slides, I'd like you to think about some issues you may face in any business setting and how blockchain might help to address the problem. So first, a technical background and a definition. So a blockchain network is more generally referred to as distributed ledger technology. And the key driver behind this is that every relevant party has access to the same information. And we trust this is the case because we trust the mechanisms behind who is allowed to transact on the network. So the most valuable part of blockchain is the transaction data, how assets got to be where they are and who initiated that transaction. The business logic is encoded in what we call smart contracts. And these are just rules or constraints on the various actors in our network. And this is just written with code. Hyperledger Fabric uses Golang or JavaScript. These are very popular languages today. So if we go to the next slide, we'll give a little bit of a difference. So the most popular use case seems to be around like cryptocurrency, right? Like Bitcoin, but it's not necessarily the most valuable for businesses, right? With a public Bitcoin, with a public blockchain like Bitcoin, there are more security mechanisms around who's allowed to transact on the network, right? With a private blockchain, all the parties are verified and there's no unapproved entities that can access the system. So if we go to the next slide, we'll just go into a little more detail about this. So the purpose of this presentation is for private blockchains, right? Ones that enterprises find that they're using. Public blockchains are a little more fluid in how they work and who uses them. But we want to talk about private blockchains as it pertains to business. So private businesses see a lot of value in private networks because there's an immutable record of assets within this network. And usually you can use this for a supply chain solution, right? Think IBM Food Trust is a very big one. Some other good use cases are reward points, like for hotels or credit cards, and cross-border payments is a big one too. I actually worked on a solution for Visa where we used cross-border payments on Hyperledger Fabric, which is an implementation of blockchain. So if we go to the next slide, this is like a quick use case that we're gonna go into later. So the anatomy of a real estate deal, right? So first, a buyer and seller may negotiate, right? And then a contract is issued by the seller's attorney. There's an exchange of comments, negotiation, inspections, right? Documents. Then a contract is signed and loans are applied to a bank. Okay, so just remember this use case and we're gonna come back to it a little bit later. So if we go to the next slide, this is just another use case. We're not gonna get into it in the interest of time. So these are just some additional applications for blockchain and real estate. Just briefly go over, right? Document ownership, which is a big one, legal agreements and smart contracts, right? Business rules, tokenization, privatization among like who owns what data. So if we go on, next slide. Just some additional things to think about. And then if we keep going, we're going to get into, the limitations. So, sorry. So there are some things you have to think about, right? Like what can blockchain not do? Okay. Data protection, who has access to see the different parts of a deal. Not that it can't do it, but these are considerations around your implementation. The initial data migration from old systems to blockchain, the overhead can be large. You need to ensure trust between members, and this is usually worked out beforehand, and we'll detail a little bit later on. The R&D cost, determining the scope of your undertaking, and we'll go over this later too. Real estate deals, right? They've been going on for years without blockchain, right? The industry doesn't necessarily need to see a change right now, so it may be more trouble than it's worth to try. And the truth is, as someone who was in the space for 2 years, blockchain is not the answer to everything, right? Just because it's new, it doesn't mean it's good or it's the right thing for any given situation, but it's good that we're trying it everywhere, right? We'll figure out where it works best, right? And I've seen it personally work the best in supply chain and financial services. And now we're gonna take a look at it in real estate. So if we go to the next slide, sorry, one more. We're gonna go over a basic banking example, right? So our smart contract in this case is if you have the funds to transfer, you can. The Genesis block in this case is the initial state of our data, and each block is a transaction, whether it's valid or invalid, right? We wanna know everything about who interacted with our network including cases of transactions that did not go through, okay? Now, the sum or the delta of these transactions should always result in the world state. Now, each party has this record, right? So if someone disputes that a transaction took place, there could be what we call a bad actor in play, right? So based on the implementation, there are mechanisms to resolve this. In Hyperledger Fabric, there's what's called an endorsement policy, where a certain subset of users must verify that a transaction is good. In Bitcoin and Ethereum, this is called proof of work, which is essentially just computing power. And this record of transactions is what separates blockchain from other database implementations, right? This is implicit to what blockchain can do. So each party tries to execute a transaction, right? In this case, we see an invalid transaction where B tried to take $3 from C that C didn't have, right? And because A and B were able to say C does not have the funds to initiate this transaction, we are able to know that this was invalid, right? But we still want to record that transaction. We want to know, hey, B tried to initiate this transaction. What's going on with B? Why are they trying to do this, right? And so now if we go to the next slide, we're going to apply this to a business network. A really easy solution to kind of conceive is document management, right? So in consulting, we in our group anyway, we generate what's called a minimum viable product, right? And because it's really hard to convince companies to change what they're doing, even if it's a change that they want to make. And so the key is to start with something small, show it's valuable, and then keep extending on that, right? And so the way we do this is very simple, right? We identify an asset, the business rules for how the network participants agree on the content of that asset. And so now we're going to model our own real estate network as an example. So think back to the deal earlier that I showed, the first one, right? What are some of the entities that we can extract from that, right? The document that we're managing in this case is the contract. The participants are the seller, the buyer, the seller's attorney. Some other entities could be like a government entity, right? An auditor, a bank, other like credit institutions, right? Any assets that are involved, the contract and its supporting documents, so like loans, credit card statements, prior agreements. And some of these may not necessarily be stored on chain, but they're still important for the business logic, right? So in Hyperledger Fabric, we use what's called a private data collection to keep some things private between organizations. This is also included because you have some implementations that are done that have to adhere to GDPR. And so you do need like private data stores and not keep certain information on chain. So if we keep going, we identify the key terms, right? How can we apply this to what like a blockchain architecture? This is the part where we analyze the business process and fit it to what the blockchain can like accomplish, right? In the consulting process, we may go through this part and decide maybe this exact use case is not the best fit for blockchain. And we'll go back to the drawing board and we'll find another part of the business process to approach next. So breaking it down, the next slide, I'm not going to get too deep into this because in the interest of time, and I'm sure these slides will be available for review later, but these are just the business rules that we would define in the contract, right? The most important thing to take out of this is that each time the asset changes, it's a transaction. So anytime the world state needs to be updated, that's a transaction, and we would execute our smart contracts to determine if the asset can change in the way we want it to. So the next slide is the last slide, wrapping up. Where's the value in this, right? In the past, our real estate deal was managed manually, right? Whether it was email exchanges or Google Drive or literally just private documents in like a file cabinet. This may present its own security risks. For example, anyone can access an email server or modify Google Docs without leaving a complete record of the changes made, right? Many different parties are needed to stay up to date with these changes on multiple systems. This can be cumbersome. The key value of blockchain is that it's consensus driven, right? Everyone agrees on all the changes, so everyone's privy to updates to the world state at the same time. It's really easy. It could be really easy to lose track of changes made to a document at a large scale. If you want to see what a contract looked like in a previous state, you may have to look way back in your file history to find the contract, and this can take time. Now, of course, I'm sure the majority of high-profile real estate deals are well managed already. The point is that these considerations can extend to any industry or business network, not just real estate. With blockchain, we can query for all the transactions on a single asset and get it back instantly. There's no need to build out advanced query features to find information relevant to this asset. Now, the question still stands, right? Like anyone can build an application with business logic. Why do we need blockchain? Well, currently, many documents are still finalized with pen and paper, right? What if we want to go digital? Say like 5 to 10 years from now, someone disputes the validity of the contract or the initial terms or where it originated, right? We have a record of encrypted transactional data showing this contract is legitimate. And in most blockchain implementations, blocks are connected with encrypted hash values, and these are very hard to fake. So that was my presentation. Again, thank you so much. This was really great. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the Q&A we have at the end.
Thank you so much, Ethan. That was really fantastic and a lot of exciting and useful information. As you said, we hope to be able to make these slides available after the conference on the conference webpage. So if anyone has questions or wants to review it further, we hope that the slides will be available. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the third panelist for this session, Daniel Schwartz, who's an alum of Hofstra University and is the manager of global real estate strategy at NASDAQ.
Yes, thank you, Ashira. And thank you to Professor Nick Bach for inviting me today. One of my favorite professors at Hofstra back in 2012. So yeah, actually, also wanted to mention Frank Zarb was our CEO in '97, from '97 to 2001. So that's just one thing that I wanted to remind everyone of. But yeah, so my background is leasing and managing real estate, and then also had a few opportunities to do some modeling as well. So in my position here in workplace analytics and strategy, I'm able to sort of bring those two pieces together and leverage data. And I think sort of an overarching theme here is, you know, compared to other industries, real estate traditionally is a little bit slow on the uptake of technology. So I guess one thing that's kind of running deep through all of our presentations is we're showing you how that's changing, and there is opportunity left. So next slide, please. So in my role, and what I'm trying to do for NASDAQ is empower our real estate team with technology and data. So what that meant when I started was allow us to easily see in one centralized location how many leases do we have, what are we spending, what departments are sitting where, what's our population, what is our you know, what are we expecting for growth, and factoring all of these things in so we can make informed decisions and not just doing, you know, perhaps what the business wants the real estate team to do, and just so making more informed decisions. Next slide. So I guess a really key tool for us is an integrated workplace management system. So, you know, think about NASDAQ. We don't own real estate. We're the tenant. We're paying landlords. Landlords are paying mortgage companies and so on. So we don't own anything. So, but what we do, we own it for short periods of time, and we need to leverage that space as best we can. So one of the ways we do that, and do that wisely, is using an integrated workplace management system. So what that means is it's a system where our HR system can push data to a software that houses all of our floor plans, and we place people in seats. And through our HR data and that connection, we can understand. We know we have our information on those employees and what department they're in. So if we look at this little snippet of a floor plan in the bottom right, these are people sitting in seats, not live. This is just like where their assigned seats are. And we know by the color coordinations, which department and team they're on. And then obviously this data rolls up into reports, and I can present and arm our team with information as to exactly how many people sit in a specific building, what teams they're on, where they sit. And then on a daily basis, we get fresh data to add more people to the seats and make any changes we need to make. So IWMS gets data from the human resources system, and then at the end of the day, it's up to our facility managers to seat people. So, after we've sort of placed everybody on our floor plan and have our data straight, we have an analytical component to this, very simple graph, how many people, if I wanted to look at just the finance business unit, how many people are sitting in different parts of the country. Here's just sort of a really super simple example of, hey, this is my finance population, and they're sitting in these 3 offices. As an sort of an added value to this type of software, this is something that employees can also use and essentially improve the workplace experience. So everybody has access to this app where they can locate a person. So they type in a person that they're looking to meet or contact. They can find their contact information, easily reach out to them, see where they sit, not in real time, it's just their assigned seat. Also book desks if there's a seating, an agile seating situation where it's not just one-to-one seating, which interestingly enough is something that's going to be more and more prevalent given that in this time we're understanding that a lot of people can work from home a lot more readily. So our seating strategies are getting looked at very closely, how we can use our space better, make it more useful and more efficient, may perhaps even take less space in the future because less people need to be in the office. And to Wayne's point earlier, we legally and ethically need to be less dense within the floor plan as well, just as an aside. So next slide. So what else? So that's sort of the IWMS system gives us an idea of sort of where we're at as a team, and we can present data, but we need to continually measure. So how do we do that? We provide, I administer annual surveys to our whole population, and that gives us very deep insights. If you statistically get nitty-gritty with that, you can find which types of things really drive satisfaction in the office and office design. Next, focus groups. So when we're designing a new office, we get very specific with the teams that are going to occupy that and how they spend their time. So different roles are very, very different. So essentially, people have to split their time between solo focus work, crawling around in spreadsheets and analyzing data. That's sort of one way that someone spends time. Another would be calls and selling and group meetings. And then there also needs to be some time for, relaxation and regrouping, grinding yourself and working the whole full day and not having any place in your real estate to go and relax and regroup is not a good formula. And then lastly, utilization studies. So understanding on a team level how often people are actually coming into the office. And this can help us develop sort of seating strategies. So next slide. So one thing that Wayne mentioned also is we're packed a little bit too tight generally in offices, and it's an industry-wide, office space-wide thing. The open floor plan was a big trend. A lot less private offices and open floor plans to foster collaboration. What we do find in this sort of example is that even in some of our higher rated offices, so if we look at our overall rating there for 2018, we see some good offices, you know, for this example, Texas, Long Island, China are good offices, but oddly still rate super low in access to quiet space. So this is you know, this is a sort of a response to people that need to do focus, or we find that anyway, it's a response to people who need to do focus work, but they're jammed into huge floor plans where people are talking, and there's no respite for them to get their, you know, focused work done. So that's one thing we find across the portfolio. Next slide. So here's an example of a floor plan. So this is, you know, this would be a view through our IWMS. So all these little circles, those are people, and they're assigned seats. So across the top, we have our sort of our aggregated data. So total seats, 19 available, and so on. We see a density of 124 feet per desk. That's in the industry. That's pretty tight. So that's just, so, you know, with this software, we can quickly dissect how tight it actually is in the floor plan. And we're at 90% occupancy. So there is room to add people, but again, it's not surprising that a floor plan like this would have people, with respect to the survey, report that it's noisy. There's nowhere to go to, you know, if I'm something that needs to focus and someone next to me needs to sell and they're on the phone, I'm going to have trouble getting my focus work done. And then so that's a common theme that we're finding in sort of the commercial office on the interior from the tenant side. So I guess one thing to kind of bring this together, and I have a lot of, and if there's any questions, I really wanted to leave that open. Hopefully there's time, but obviously we're in a time where there's a lot of people are working from home. So we could go to the next slide. One thing real estate teams are working on right now is what do we do when we open the doors? What's the strategy? And we don't know the full answer yet. All we can do is try and start our planning. That is what we're doing. Here's an example of the type of thing that we're working on right now. So normally this floor plan would be fully seated, or, you know, have a couple of vacant seats, but it'd be fully seated. In this example, what I'm showing is we're creating 6-foot radius distances between people, and then, you know, through with that, and so the only optional seats to use are the ones in green with the green box around them, and then these orange areas are they're usually communal areas, like pantries, lounges, and also meeting rooms. But we're urging caution and social distancing in those areas. And obviously no use. We have phone booths across our offices, and we're not allowing use of that. So just to give you a flavor of what real estate teams are doing to try to figure out what we're going to do when the time comes to get back into the office. But with that, thanks for having me, and hope to have some questions to answer for you guys. Thank
you, Dan. That's fantastic. Again, if people want to ask questions, please type them into the chat box. You can type it to me privately if you would like. But I'll kind of start off with a question for all of the panelists, which is, do you think that the demand for urban office space is going to suffer or, you know, be reduced as people realize that they can do some office jobs from home? And do you think, or do you foresee any flight, suburban flight, both commercial and residential, as people realize that they can work from home, and what do you think the impact will be on incorporating technology and, you know, on office space and things like that? And I'll open it up to the panel for whoever wants to respond first.
Yeah, I could take that, at least the first stab at that. So I think that this whole craziness, this pandemic is putting a 5 years worth of evolution into a couple of months, right? So everybody was slowly figuring out the work from home thing, the remote work from home thing, and now every corporation has been forced to figure it out in 2 weeks. Same thing goes with kind of flight from urban to suburban. I think after this, you're going to have a good amount of people who remember being stuck in their studio apartment and would have loved to have a little bit more space. But at the same time, you know, anything that we come up with as predictions usually means that we're not thinking about something else, some other unintended consequences that we can't even fathom yet. So it's going to be very hard to tell, but I can assure you that, you know, like Wayne said, and I know for TREP, every single company, when their lease comes up for renewal over the next few years, is going to think about this time and remember that, you know what, we probably could cut our space by 25% or 50% and still kind of figure it out, right? We could have half the people working from home, or we could have kind of rotations in the office and things like that. Because I have to say, at least for us, we've been just as effective, if not more effective, now that we're all fully working from home. So it's a little scary for the office market for sure.
Thanks. Dan, did you want to add?
Absolutely. So yeah, traditionally, you know, we go to a one-to-one seating strategy, and you know, the real estate team, it's clearly not where the trend is. It's not the wise way to spend money. We find our utilization rates, so people actually attending the office Monday through Thursday, is near 60%. So that's Monday through Thursday. So just don't even count Fridays, because it would skew the data even below 50%. I guess simply you could say you're losing half of your rent on that. That's debatable how you'd want to calculate that, but the fact is we could do more with space if we didn't just assign everyone a desk. We could make a better environment. We could make a safer environment by taking some of those seats and making more meeting rooms, things of this nature, and then so yeah, there's just. Do I think that will actually decrease in urban demand? I don't necessarily see that, but I think people will be taking less. They will be taking less and less of a footprint, but I think more people will still come in to the office, and I do think co-working is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. People need that flexibility. We currently have 5 co-working offices that we use. We don't prefer that, but we do it when we need it, and we need to sort of delay making a leasing decision.
Thank you. And Ethan, do you wanna?
Yeah, sure. So I just started my new job a week ago, and the entire onboarding process was fully remote, right? And I'm already integrated into the team, and we're all doing a wonderful job and working together well. So there's definitely something to be said for being able to work from home and everyone can do it. But that being said, I think that there's no substitute for that human-to-human interaction, even as someone whose entire job is on a computer, right? Being able to have those ad hoc discussions, not feel like you're bothering someone if you're pinging them, right? Like, I think that those in-person office spaces, there's definitely value there. I mean, I was still working from home 1 day a week at my old job, and we all were, right? So working from home is not a novel concept. I'm sure a lot of people knew about it, but I think working from home as a practice will become a lot more, I'll say, socially acceptable now that everyone's done it and we've seen how it works at scale.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I know just from the university perspective, we've been talking about going online and classes online, and then just in a overnight, really, we had to transition to online entirely, and we've all kind of developed the capacity to do it. Even if we go into our offices, there'll probably be some changes. We have time for another question if anyone wants to send one in. I guess one other question that I have is, pre or post COVID, with regard to technology advances, what are some of the obstacles you see of incorporating them into kind of, standard real estate transactions? What other industry segments could you see pushing back against that, or, sort of have a stake in not making parts of the real estate transaction automatic?
Yeah, well, I think Ethan, if he's successful, will eliminate the need for real estate brokers, right? So there are a lot of players in this market that make money because of the opacity of the market, and because they have specific knowledge of specific assets, and they need to, if you're looking to buy something, you need to go to them and they can help you. Any sort of technology or software or really successful data platforms are in some way replacing somebody in that process, right? So there's always going to be some friction and some fight against it. Just like there was in the 1900s with automation of factories, it's going to be now automation of white collar jobs, and there's always going to be some pushback there. And I think real estate in general is so location and specific knowledge specific that we're never going to totally replace that. But there's definitely a lot of kind of entrenched interests that you're fighting against whenever you're doing this, including like the fact that most people in this industry are on the older side, and they don't really want to adapt to new technology most of the time.
Yeah. And Ethan, if I could just, get your take on that.
Sure. I mean, I hit Joe hit it right on the head, right? Like we see this in insurance too, right? A lot of our implementations are essentially cutting out the middleman. And do people really want to do that? And there's something to be said for trying, right? The best solutions come from disruption. So it's more just about kind of testing the case, like I said, on a very small scale first. Once companies do see the value in that, which I would say probably isn't for another 5 or 10 years or so. Once companies do see the value in that at scale, I think you're going to see a more rapid adoption of emerging technologies like blockchain.
Thank you. And maybe just a final comment, Dan, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I was at my own closing a couple of years ago, end of 2018, and it takes like a half a day to do. Bringing the bank, wiring the money, title, lawyers. Title seems like that should be on the blockchain. I mean, that should be number one. Why do I pay title insurance? I mean, you have to now, I guess, but why can't title and like evidence of ownership be on the blockchain? That's the most obvious kind of next step or a really key fit for blockchain and real estate transactions in my mind. It's really frustrating to try to go to a closing, and if you're a big company, spending hours trying to close deals, that's very wasteful.
All right. Thank you all so much for your insight and participation. Really, really appreciate it.